Good evening and welcome to the Planning Board meeting on Wednesday, October 4th, 2023. We'll open the meeting at 6:33. Can we get a roll call, please?
Right. Tom Alberti is excused.
Just-
Karen Robinson is excused. Laurie Millette.
Here.
Chuck Fowler.
Here.
Richard Anthony.
Here.
Bill Coy.
Here?
Victoria Healy.
Here.
All right, if we can take a look at the minutes, please.
Appoint me as a voting member.
So there's a whole
Oh,
bunch of
that's
little
right.
errors on there.
Right. Yeah, before we do that, if
Oh, yeah,
we'll
right.
appoint Richard Anthony as a voting member tonight.
Shall I point them out? There's a number of errors.
Yep, go right
They're all
ahead.
typos. So on page 2, changed Telica to Intelica twice on the bottom there.
Okay,
And that should, and the third to last line in the second to the bottom paragraph, it says expensive that, and it should be than. Did not do a good job of proofreading these.
okay.
On page 5 at the top, I have a start 5 time. That's 1, 2, and the third line down with a start 5 time. I don't know. New language. You see it? So
Yeah.
it's on the top of page 5.
Yep, I see it. Special permit to be held, it's. Start. What was the start time supposed to be? Was it supposed to be 5? I forget now.
Oh,
Also,
No, it just says with the start.
Oh, with the start, okay, I got you. I'm like,
my typing is just wonderful. I
okay,
usually do a better job of catching these things. Also, agritourism is agritourism, and I did that wrong at the bottom of page 5 and top of page 6.
the next to me.
all right. Oh, no problem at all.
I didn't have that.
All right. If we're ready, if we can get a motion for the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes from September 2023.
As corrected?
That's correct.
That's corrected.
I second it.
By Richard. All those in favor?
Aye.
There's 4 of us tonight, right?
Yeah.
So 400. All right. Victoria, top survey results.
Yeah, do you mind if we switch around the agenda a little bit so that Rob can get home
Fine.
to his
Whatever
family?
you want to do, it's good enough. Good by me.
Oh, either way.
So which one were we doing for the build-out analysis?
Correct.
Yeah.
Do people have copies of the build out? I brought a couple, and it's not the build out. It was just a quick synopsis. So I have a couple extras if anyone needs them. Yours.
Yeah, it's in our packets.
Okay,
Yeah, we have it.
cool. Thank you.
Can I get your name for the record, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do a whole thing here. I just wanted to make sure I'm not getting up when not needed. I'm Robert Prine. I'm with the Rockingham Planning Commission. I've been before this board probably 15 or 20 times over the past 20 years. And in fact, I believe I did a build out for you in 2007, I think was the time. But so it's been a while. And it's nice to be back. But with our HOP grants, did I give you my name? It's Robert Pride. Sorry. So I've been the GIS specialist at the Rockingham Planning Commission for 22 years, I believe. And I've done probably somewhere on the order of 30 build outs for different communities in 2 different states. So this is kind of a forte of mine. I've been asked to present this at a national conference. So it's a pretty good process now. And I just wanted to speak to you today about sort of the preliminary results that we have here, and look to you for input, thoughts, and then I want to reconnect after this meeting as you have thoughts and can send them to me. It's always hard at a meeting to actually do the work of the build out. So that's the intent tonight, just to present you with what we're doing and why and how things are looking. I always start with what is a build out, and it's a pretty simple process. It gets a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about what a build out is, and there's a lot of thoughts that it's this huge, complex, horrible process, and it really doesn't have to be like that. It's a pretty straightforward process with a little bit of magic and computer in the middle. What we don't want to do with build outs is somewhat more important. And I always try to say, imagine this as a camera and you rub a little bit of Vaseline over the lens. We're never looking specifically at a property. And so one of the reasons why I don't tend to come in with lots of maps when I do a build out is what happens when I bring a map to a planning board is everyone looks over, they find their parcel and they go, mm-hmm. And so with a build out, we want to be really careful not to do that. You don't want to zoom in on your property and say, ooh, there's 2 dots and that's never going to happen. That's where we start to get in trouble. This is an overall town-wide look at what's buildable. There's a lot of wiggle in the data that allows units to be placed here and there. And when you mush it all together and swirl it up a little bit, it becomes accurate. When you zoom down at site level, it becomes inaccurate. Part of the reason why that's so important is back in the day, maybe even your build out in 2007, sometimes developers would then come in with the build out and say, it says 6. And you guys would be sitting there reeling saying, no, I'm sorry, that's not the reality. So it's not a parcel level analysis is what it comes down to. So know that and be careful of that. That's the biggest caveat of this. The second big caveat of this is that there's a lot of assumptions that go into this methodology. And in essence, again, we're swirling a little bit here, and it has to be that way in order to allow the analysis to happen. So we're always sort of leading towards the worst case scenario or the most buildable. The one exception to that rule is oftentimes overlay districts. So if you had like an elderly overlay that allows you to build 500 units on a parcel where typically you'd get 6 housing units, I'm not going to use that overlay because your build out is just going to say, 8 billion units, and then it doesn't have any meaning. So things like overlay districts that allow a very special exception, we're not doing. Special exceptions are not used throughout this. So we're taking your zoning, we're using it in a worst case scenario or most buildable scenario and applying that into the build out. So with that, I take a step back into what is the build out. And what I often say is, imagine, I like food. Imagine it's cookie dough. So you roll out the cookie dough onto the cutting board, and then you start taking all of your little cookie cutters and cutting them out and doing all the things to that cookie dough. Well, that cookie dough is the town of Plastow. So the first thing we chop out is conservation lands. The next thing we chop out is what's already built. The next thing we chop out is wetlands, wetland buffers, the various things that constrain building, steep slopes. So we keep cutting out all the little things, and then we look at the dough that's left. And back in the day, there was 2 types of build out. So we used to do land use build outs and we used to do parcel build outs. So a parcel build out would take all the parcel lines and use them. Those were very complex, and with lower computing power, they would take days to calculate. So in turn, rather than doing that, sometimes we'd just do the land use build outs where I would say, this is residential. And anything residential that was connected could be used together. And we didn't care about parcel lines. And there's some applicability there in that you've seen developers who come in and buy 6 parcels next to each other and then develop it. And that does happen. This build out is a parcel based build out. So we are abiding by the parcel lines, and you won't see that mixing of where 6 parcels can be thrown together allows a greater density. So another little caveat of this. So all said and done, once we have that remaining cookie dough, we divide it up into the parcels. And then the next thing we do is we throw your zoning at it. So we say, all right, this parcel needs this much buildable space in order to locate a new unit. So what's left? And so a bunch of parcels fall out from that. From there, we apply setbacks and other such features of how your zoning works and say, okay, can you locate a dot in that space? The software is actually really beautiful in that way, because what it does is if you have a parcel that's big enough to locate a unit, I tell it to run X number of iterations trying to place that unit abiding by setbacks. And so it'll do, I believe I have it set to 1,000 right now. It'll try 1,000 times and then it goes, I just can't fit it, and it throws it out. So sometimes it's just not going to fit. Back in the olden days when I used to do these and I didn't have the fancy software, I would sit there and I would try a couple and I would be like, and most of the time we couldn't actually eliminate them. So it was just sheer math. And so this allows a little more flexibility into that. So I think that's the quick and dirty of this. So I've combed through your zoning. Victoria helped me comb through your zoning. We've taken your parcel data. We've put it all together. I took your initial constraints, so we call them constraints layers, so the conservation land, the wetlands, the wetland buffers, and so on and so forth, and thrown them in. I haven't spent a lot of time to tweak them. So that's why this is still a preliminary build out. And that's where we start to interface with each other. And I've cut up that cookie dough from that stuff. I've thrown the zoning at it, and I said, fit as many things as you can. And so I think if you go to these last couple pages, that's where you see these results happen. So the first is preliminary results, new units at build out. And what you see here is a bunch of colors and a bunch of little black dots. And the colors are saying this is buildable land remaining from this preliminary build out. The dots are saying, and it gets somewhat wonky because obviously we're looking at an entire town here at a very tight or zoomed out scale. So the dots are saying, here's where I can locate a new unit, a new residential unit. Now, let me take a step back because I forgot this part in the preamble to this. These build outs are more applicable in the residential realm rather than non-residential. So this is not a non-residential build out. The reason why we do this is particularly in this part of New Hampshire, and you're probably more towards the other side of this than most of our communities. We often overzone for non-residential, and that's not, I'm not saying that as a fault, but we allow a lot in hopes of bringing that non-residential in. If I say you can locate to the zoning that's allowed in most non-residential zones, it's going to place a billion things. This build out takes the non-residential and doesn't treat it as units, it treats it as square footage of non-residential, and it doesn't discriminate of what that non-residential is. So what you'll see is you'll see that green triangle appear, one per lot where it's allowed per zoning. So in other words, that lot still has some amount of non-residential allowed. And then it calculates out a square footage on that based on your zoning regulations. So you'll only see one triangle per lot at most. And then it'll give me that square footage. That square footage is often very wonky. So I've had towns like Danville where you do this, and that square footage comes out to like absurd numbers, like 50 million square feet of non-residential development, because they just throw a huge swath of land and say, please come. And when the build out does it, it says, sure. And that's not reality. So we're a little careful with that. Part of the reason for that is in order to do a good non-residential build out, you really have to take an economic analysis into it. You really have to take a look at, is this located near a corridor? Does this have the things that a business needs to develop? Does it have broadband? Does it have these other things? And that's a full-on analysis from a whole another person, an economist or someone in that vein. And that's just not what we're equipped for. And the final point to that is, frankly, most of our towns, not that you're not worried about non-residential, you want to know about the residential that's going to happen in the build-out process. So that's why that is what it is. This map tends to be that, it's that first result, and it's where we start looking at it. And again, what I tend to tell my communities is, take a look, squint your eyes a little bit, see where those dots start to congregate. And what you really want to do with this build out is you want to squint, see where they congregate. And then the next step from the build out is to say, okay, I'm seeing lots happening here. I'm seeing nothing happening here. And that's not how I want to see this town grow out. I want to see something happening here and little happening here. And so that next step is to say, something's going on with our zoning. Can we change something here and here to make more here and less there? So that's the idea of this. So that's the applicability to this. Oftentimes we do this process and people say, what's the number? And you get the number and then that's the end. That number, it has some science, it has some math behind it, it has some accuracy, but it's not the end all be all. So this is where I implore you to use it to take those next steps. And you can start doing things like, what if we change the density in this zone, the allowable density in this zone? What does that do? What if we higher it, lower it? What if we put in a water line? So I think that's this map. And I'm happy to either take questions or do the whole spiel and then take questions. I'm talking a lot, so.
Anyone have any questions right now? Richard?
No, not right now. It's probably.
I'm fine.
And by all means, there will be a million of them. The next map is showing a very similar thing. I have the same black dots and green triangles, and they're in the same places. I threw on the little red dots to show existing units, more or less. Please understand that the scale of these dots is not real. So it looks very cluttered and it looks messy. If I go smaller to make them more real, frankly, you don't see them well. So there's a little bit of wiggle with that. But this gives you that idea. So this is where you can squint your eyes and say, okay, we're seeing a lot here and we're seeing a lot there. Is that what we're looking for? If we go on to this last map, this is where it gets really ugly. And I fully understand that this map is not particularly useful in a lot of ways, but it's just to give you an idea of where we're heading to, or where we're heading from, I guess. Everything in color on this map is one of the constraint layers it's all the cookie cutters that are being taken out and thrown away. So if you look at the green, that's granite conservation land. If you look at the light purple, it's steep slopes above 15%. If you look at the blue, it's both water and FEMA flood spelled wrong hazard areas. If you look at that other purple with the black outline, it's wetlands. And then the pink is a little wiggly. That name is awkward. Unbuildable land uses. And what this is I took the existing units, the dots that I saw from aerial photos, I threw them into the 2015 land use data layer, which again was us looking at 2015 aerial photos and saying, that's a house, that's a house, that's a house. That's non-residential, we think it's a blah. So I threw it against that. And then I took out the unbuildable land uses, so that's residential. So if it's existing residential, you're not going to build over it. So things that have already been built out, things that are unbuildable are in that. These do all overlap each other on this map because there's no reason not to overlap each other. So where you're seeing granite conservation lands, there's not a lot of them showing here. It's because something's overlapping them. So in essence, where you see the white is where you see the black dots, and that's what's left to grow. This is just giving you an idea of why, if you look at the first map and you say, why isn't there some black dots here? Hopefully this map can help to answer that. In the final build out, I do an individual map of each of the constraint layers so that you can get a better idea of that. If we skip back, I believe it's 4 pages, you see 2 little graphs. And these are the numbers that people look for. So there's 2 graphs here. The one on the left is dwelling units at build out. In the blue, it's numeric. So that's the old type of build out that I used to do where you did the math and we didn't try to use setbacks to fit it spatially. So with that, this build out ends up at 281 new dwelling units within the town of Plastow. If you throw in your setbacks, it then drops down to 241. So that 241, the little red line I drew in there, that's our base number for this build out. So that's kind of where we're starting. What I expect is as we refine the data sets going into this, we'll see that number drop down. It's not going to be huge significance, most likely, unless I miss something ginormous. So we'll see that drop down a little bit. The thing to the right, the graph to the right, is build out buildings. And so this is where the non-residential comes into place. So this is just buildings, it's adding on buildings that are non-residential. Again, within the non-residential build out portion, a parcel, so if you think like a strip mall, that would be called one building and it's got 9 units or whatever in it. And so we actually report out the non-residential as square feet again. So this is just to give you an idea that there is some amount of non-residential placed within this build out at this point. I think that's the quick and dirty run through, trying to be quick and concise for you. And I'm not sure I even knew what I had for time before you tonight, so I might be vastly quick or vastly long. But I'm willing to answer any and all questions.
I guess, what type of analysis would you apply to this? I mean, it is kind of, I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
I mean, the map that you show here that has more detail that you said that's, I mean, kind of, I mean, almost looks a little more intuitive. It kind of explains things a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't know, what am I looking at, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the $1 million question of the build out. That's where you have to start asking yourself, what are we trying to learn from this? Probably the best thing that you're doing from here is you're starting to come up with your what if scenarios. And this is where I like to come before you at this time so that as a board, you get together and you say, what are we trying to, this is the long-term planning aspect that we don't often get to do as planning board members. So what are the things that we want to do and what are we trying to accomplish? So you might say we want to see less development in the park area, in which case you can say, hey, Rob, can you take this zoning district or this area here and draw it on a map and make it a new zone that we're calling Build Out 1 and make the density allowed in that, 8 acres per unit. Now, what does that do to our build out? And I'll report out a new map and a new set of numbers. Now, if you wanted to get really, into this, you could give me 9 new zoning districts. Now, they're not, of course, adopted zoning districts, but it's a play. It's a scenario planning type situation.
Like, I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, for, the build-out dwelling units, that graph there, so you're saying like the variance between the numeric and the spatial, that's a result of factoring in setback requirements and things like that.
Yep.
So if we wanted to look at, let's say the commercial areas and let's say the industrial areas, you'd be able to play with those numbers and say that if your zoning were to be changed or modified in some way, you could allow for X, Y, and Z.
My answer is yes, with a big caveat. Again, non-residential within this build out is not going to have a lot of sensitivity to it. So if you say we're going to do a setback of 75 feet instead of 50, the output number might be vastly different, but I don't have a lot of confidence in either of them. So they're in a huge range target. So that's, I mean, we can play with non-residential and I can give you a comparison. So you're going to see 6% more, and that's a valid number. But to say it's from 38 million square feet to 41 million square feet, probably not all that meaningful because that 38 isn't all that dialed into reality. But to say 6% is much more real.
Would you be able to identify, like, if we were to talk about residential,
Mhm.
right? Just in terms of like looking at this map,
Right.
would you be able to identify certain areas as being candidate areas? Like, you don't want to have something where, hey, we can make the
Yeah.
houses on top of each other or something like that. But if there's something that doesn't look like it's heavily utilized, and we're talking about like modifying a setback a little bit, what that would look like.
And within the residential side of the build out, modifying a setback is a great way to play with this. So yeah, absolutely. So I meant to circle back to that.
Okay.
If you're talking the residential build out, modifying a setback from 20 to 50 feet is going to tell you a lot of information. It's going to tell you if there's any sensitivity to setbacks within that zone. And it might tell you that spending a year trying to change your setbacks and going before town meeting with a warrant article to do so is not going to help anything.
Yeah. So if what you're saying is that if we were to modify it and you wouldn't get any statistical move on it, then it's really not worth looking at.
Correct. Yeah. So if we did a second run of this, with the setback being 75 instead of 25, and you saw no increase in the build out or decrease in the build out, you'd say that's not probably worth a year of meetings. But again, that's your decision, not mine. But that's where this becomes really useful. Some towns have done things like they've said, what if we can serve this whole area? And they look and it doesn't really change the numbers at all. Some conservation commissions, I sat on a planning board and a conservation commission. We started with a build out on the conservation commission to say, here's the properties that are likely to build out. Here's the areas where we really care about because that's where our water is, and start to use that. And then we had a little more ammunition as we approached landowners to say, hey, you're saying 52 units here and we're saying 7. So that's why we're offering you this number rather than that number. So
Does this take into account any areas that are landlocked that you just can't get to?
it does not. One of the things, one of the assumptions within this build out, frontage is not used in this build out. And that sounds really, when I was on the planning board, I was uncomfortable with that idea. Part of the reason is I can't predict new roads. So what we do instead is we use a little bit of a wiggle factor. We use a efficiency factor is what I call it. So I say, when you develop this parcel of land, it's only 80% efficient. So if you had 2 acre zoning in a 4 acre lot, you're not going to get 2 units there because I'm taking 15% off the top for you to do things like roads, frontage, or not frontage, but the various things on the parcel that you need to do to make it useful. So you'd need a little more than 4 acres to make that work. And so landlocked, you could always say, hey, they might get easements from their neighbors and
Yeah, I get it,
there.
because I look at this and there's some, right off the
Yeah.
bat, I'm like,
Well, and that's the kind of thing where in the past with various planning boards, I've put in a constraint layer called, such and such town constraints. And you might circle 10 of those areas and just say, this is surrounded by wetlands and this guy isn't selling. Take this out, and I'll draw a polygon that says that doesn't get
and if there
included.
are, like, say, common lands for, like, condo complexes or even developments, does that take that into account, what the common lands are?
To some extent,
'Cause those
yes.
common lands usually can't be developed, right?
Well, I've spent a lot of time reading those deeds.
Yeah.
Some can, some can't. Most are intended not to. Whether the language would hold up and who actually owns it, who knows?
Right.
We do often add that into the build out as part of one of those special scenarios. I think when I did Salem's build out, I did do common lands as a constraint. And we noted in the build out, common lands have been removed. Now, some have the potential to get built if the association owns it and there's not an actual easement.
Yep.
They could sell it. So absolutely we could add it. The reason why I say maybe and maybe not, so right now conservation lands within this build out is just the Granite Conservation Lands data set, which I believe in Plastow is pretty close to accurate, but there might be stuff held from the CC or new stuff that hasn't made it into the Granite. And that's where we start communicating. Maybe you have a conservation commissioner come and look at the map and say this, and this. Those are off the table.
Right, because they are looking right now, and I think they already have a public hearing set up. They're going to deem some areas,
Yeah.
Wet.
Yep. And, if we wanted to get into another scenario, and to some extent, I think one scenario is part of this project, so we have to be a little careful, but we've built the model. Scenarios from here aren't a big deal. So if we want to do other scenarios, we can always talk. And with circuit riding funds, sometimes there's wiggle room. You could do a scenario where if you know that the CC is looking at 6 properties, they're non-public, you can give those to me. It can just be we'd have to figure out how to make it allowable, but we could say, what does that mean?
Yep. Okay.
So, yep.
So you're talking about the prime wetland?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So that's, in November, they're having a public hearing.
to,
That's going to be on our warrant in
Okay.
March.
okay.
Yep.
Cause I saw
For
it.
some reason, I think it's like, I want to say 40. Does that sound right? 40 locations?
I don't know what the final number is going to be, but I know it's more than 10. I know it's more. It's probably.
I spent a inordinate amount of time looking through your website and various places looking because your ordinance calls out prime wetlands.
Yeah.
And I saw that Mark West did a study in 2019. But I couldn't find anything anywhere. So
Well, because it hasn't.
it hasn't yet.
It was
passed.
supposed to come before us like 2 years ago.
Right. I saw
but
that.
different things have happened and it didn't.
No worries.
Last year was going to be the one that it was supposed to be on it, but now,
But it
But
should
there
be. It
is
should
a
be
hearing in November.
Right.
I
So it
know
should be
that.
this year, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
Last year they missed that date.
Yeah.
And I dare say, to some extent, and I know Mark well, we work together often, to a large extent, he's using similar wetlands layers to what I've already put in here and refining them. So he's adding some here, he's taking some off there. So there's a wish and a wash. I'm guessing there's probably not a lot of wetlands within your prime wetlands because those are the good wetlands, the productive wetlands that aren't being reflected here as a constraint. That's a guess because I haven't seen them. I could also ask Mark, he's obviously done the study. I could ask him for that data and he would send it to me and I could throw it into this and
Yeah, because that's
see
all.
if it
That's a
changes.
big piece, right?
I mean, I don't think it's going to change your number a
No?
lot, but it's going to be a lot of land. But
Right.
we've already taken out the hydric A and hydric B, and I'm guessing those are going to be rather inclusive of your prime wetlands.
Okay.
So when you compiled this, do you also look at what's in current use right now? Is that a part of this calculation?
No. I mean, some of the conservation lands themselves might have current use over them. Otherwise, no. And the reason for that is oftentimes, the easiest example, oftentimes families will put a piece of land into current use. Mom and dad die, the kids split it up, sell it off, and it becomes new units. So things like that, I leave it. So unless there's a very specific purpose or unless you tell me include it, I leave them as part of the buildable. Another one, and I believe it was Plastow in that last iteration, we went for a very long time over and over about whether to include golf courses or not. They're developed, but they can really quickly become lots of houses. Newmarket had that happen. So that's something else to think about. So, and another great example of that is Exeter and Kensington. I did build outs for, and the Phillips Exeter land really has no. It's often called conservation land. A lot of it has no actual protections, no deed restrictions, no perpetuity kind of things to protect it. So whether you include it or not, that's a question. And so they had to think about, might the academy someday sell this? So that's why I come before you, and it's why I'm not going to ask for a lot of decisions tonight. Take this home, digest it, think of those questions. By all means, I believe I do not have my email right here. I should. You can contact Victoria. You can look on our website and contact me.
It always all goes back to Victoria.
Yeah, and that's, she knows where to find me. But no, contact me with those questions and I'll answer them. And, try to think of what the big questions are for you. I mean, I know when I sat on the planning board, we all had different questions. So this is where you start chatting and say, well, what are we trying to do here? Why is this zone so built out? And are we cool with that? That's the power of this. Taking it and saying, hey, cool. Putting it aside is where we aren't helping ourselves.
No, I think this has been good just to see it laid out like this.
Yeah. And I try to keep it simple within this context. Our final report is going to have the vast majority of this writing in it, and I have 10 other pages that I throw in. I'll give you some tables. The next step is I'll give you some tables. And again, there's a little bit of wiggle here where I say with 58 new units or 400 new units, you might see X amount of more police calls. You'll see this many more students. You'll see this many more water usage, CO2 emissions. I calculate those mostly straight lines. So this many of units times this factor of phone calls to the police equals this many more. Those factors we've built over the years with our various communities, looking at town reports from our region. Some came more statewide, but they're pretty applicable here. But it's hard with a town like Plastow. You're a little bigger than the vast majority of our communities, so it might be more impactful or less impactful. So we can look at those factors, but I give a table of 50 different factors that calculate up with the build out. And I can also calculate those across different scenarios. So if you give me that scenario 2 where you say, hey, we're not building here, here, and here, or whatever it is, I'll give you those 50 factors at that too. So then you can say, if we restrict this, we end up with the amount of school-age kids that actually fit in our school rather than, 200 more where now we have to talk about a new school.
Right.
So that's some of the value of this. And those, again, are a little wiggly, but it's a mechanism to thinking and planning. So next steps are, get back to me, ask the questions, figure out what we're trying to move forward to. So think of what that scenario 2 is. This is our base scenario or scenario 1. See if you think that I'm missing constraints. So things like the prime wetlands and other things. And certainly if you wanted to get a CC member to look at my map of conservation lands, it is just the granite, but I can send them the specific map and have them light up any properties that are missing. That's always a good step to add into this.
Yeah, that would be good to do.
And I will reflect back to you the build-out zoning table that I use. So the zoning for build-out is a little different only in that where parcels are in 2 different zones, I have to throw it into one or another, and I use the house point, if there is one, to determine that. And places where 2 zones overlap, I might have a different calculation for. So sometimes there's a zone that doesn't actually exist. It's just me putting in a placeholder for that. So, but yeah, digest, get back to me.
I like that. It kind of brings a picture into it. Are there any other questions?
No, I don't.
Good,
Excellent.
so you'll be hearing, I'm sure, from us.
Well,
Well, I should say Victoria will be hearing from be contacting you because she's the go-between.
I can hide from her, so it's cool. No. And on my docket, only because I'm curious, is to compare this to our last build out, which was a different process,
Yeah.
but it'll be cool to see the difference.
Sure.
I used to make the joke back then. I'd say things like, "You're not going to know until 20 years from now, and I won't be around." And yet here I am. So, so
Lo and behold.
that kind of stinks, but here we are.
I'd be,
It beats the alternative.
Yep. But I could have moved to Aruba.
I guess I'd be, you're referencing a previous build out. Again, this would be the first time I've seen something like this, so I'd probably be interested in knowing what some of the back and forth would have been on the first build out. Just to kind of have a sense, or if there was no back and forth. I mean, maybe there wasn't. Maybe they were just like, "This is fantastic," and
No,
that's the end of it.
that was not the case.
Okay.
Quick memory here.
Yeah.
I believe we went back and forth on the golf courses quite a bit. I believe we went back and forth on conservation lands a lot. A lot of our budget was spent in that day trying to connect parcels to assessing, which at the time was not necessarily an easy thing. And in fact, Plastow was a lesson learned for a lot of communities throughout the United States because of that. I expended our entire budget for the build out trying to connect those two data sets. But those were the big things. And then my memory tells me, and this is where we grabbed Tim Moore because he was in the room too. My memory tells me that I believe we had about half the board was ready to have me murdered and just thought I was the most ignorant person on the planet. And the other half of the board was kind of like, maybe he knows something.
Yeah.
And it was in a time where a lot of lessons were learned by me, and to not throw numbers and be very confident in them, and to tell you not to look at specific parcels, because that's kind of what happened is people zoomed in on their parcel and said no. And I had to try to then backpedal from that and say, well, okay. So there was a lot of that. I think the number was a lot larger, but I don't recall, and I'll get you that. I still have it. It's still there. It still lives. So it'll be fun to look at. It'll be fun to see what developed versus what I thought.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah.
Now, the assessing question, was that resolved, or was that just sort of a
In that
point of contention that
yeah, I mean, in that iteration, I was just trying to get the two data sets to know each other and love each other, which I got to. It was just a painful process. Nowadays, we put in unique identifiers to both, and they just click. So yeah. I'll look and see what else I remember, and I know I have copious notes. I took it over about a third the way through, and the budget was already gone. My predecessor took copious notes, so I know I have pages of notes.
Okay.
So yeah,
It'd be interesting.
yeah, and ask Tim too. He'll have some recollection.
I'm sure he will.
Yeah, he will.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very
I
much.
appreciate it.
That was great.
Yeah, have a great night. And
Thank you,
Ping
you
me.
too.
are you good with me?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Good times. I forgot to use my nerd at the nerdery joke. That's kind of what I do is I hop behind the computer and just nerd it up for a while. So, yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
You will.
Drive safe.
Yeah, I think we already have it.
All right. HOP survey results. I guess kind of give us the main theme.
Yeah.
It was one thing that came across, a couple different things.
Yeah, definitely. So you all have the printed PDF absolute book. You can still look at it online using the regular links of publicinput.com/Plastow Housing 2023. So you can read through all the comments on there. Not all the comments are in that big packet. But I did go through and I looked at everything and I pulled out some themes. We ended up getting the final number was 118 individuals.
This is closed now, right?
It is close, yep. Over 1,500 responses or comments to the survey questions. So whether that be people selecting their answer or upvoting or commenting on other people's comments. I got 4 paper surveys. And again, I'm going to send out this report to everyone too. It's like 6 pages. It pretty much kind of does the overview of the HOP grant to remind people what's going on, and then it summarizes the participation and then talks about the next steps. So hold a public input event, develop a land use regulatory audit, and then develop the build out model. So over half of the participants, 60%, have lived in Plastow for more than 10 years. And less than half of the participants were over the age of 55. And 74% work full-time, and 20% are retired. 14% of respondents have a household income of over $200,000, and 34% had a household income that was less than $100,000. So it's household income. It's not just per person, but a household could just be one person. But it was funny. A grand majority of the respondents did not want to answer that question.
About their income?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Not totally surprised.
No. But a large percentage of people work full time, 74%. That's because I read through the RIE results too. They're all retired. But Plastow's different. It's all middle class working individuals for the most part. No second homers, unlike RIE. So a few things that I found. A lot of residents are concerned about affordability, obviously. A lot of them are aware that it is the market, the housing market, and there's high interest rates and lack of availability driving the prices up. But they're also seeing that most of the homes that are being built within the last few years are just really big and really expensive. There was a lot of mention about how young families and older individuals can't afford to live in the area, especially for older individuals that are no longer working. Taxes was a huge thing. The topic of high taxes was raised over almost 50 times, especially when we were asking that question of, is your housing going to be sufficient for your future? So sad. Another theme, protecting natural resources is definitely a priority. Not a lot of people went into such great detail. They're just worried about overcrowding and getting rid of conservation areas and open spaces. I thought there would be more concern about wells and well water and preserving individuals' water, but it was mostly about open space as far as that particular natural resources concern was. And another sad truth, a substantial number of residents do not feel secure in their housing in Plastow. There were about 40 people that did say yes when we asked, when you think of living in Plastow in 5, 10, or 20 years, will your current home meet your future needs? But it was yes, but. Yes, and. Most of them were concerned with taxes, like I said, lack of elder care, lack of transportation when you do age, and homes either being too big. And a few of them mentioned being interested in getting an additional unit to make their homes multi-generational or to get some extra income. 21 respondents said that no, they were not. They don't think that their home will fit their needs They just flat out said no. But there were a lot of maybes too. Another goal, lack of understanding of Plasto's housing goals. So I'm excited to do the open house. I hope that people do show up. We're going to make the goals a lot more blatantly obvious this time. Yeah, 25 people said that they didn't know what the goals were. Several residents expressed that they wish the goals were to slow or stop development. And a lot of them mentioned commercial development specifically, slow development, especially commercial. And unfortunately, some of the respondents felt that developers usually got what they wanted, regardless of the wants and needs of the community. So I think that's another kind of clue to see that people don't understand how things work, how things are developed, and how goals are developed, and how zoning works. And like there were a couple comments of like the town shouldn't have anything to do with what people do with their land, and Plasto should do more research when hiring builders to make developments. Like that's not what we do.
Right.
We don't even own any land. So hopefully we can get some education around here, or just align goals. That would work too. And as part of the visual preference survey, residents definitely prefer single family homes, but especially smaller ones. A lot of the comments were centered around overcrowding and the size of homes and setbacks. Like I said before, they're very aware that the new housing developments have been really big and expensive. And Plastow is supposed to be a place where you work a job, you work 40 hours a week, you have a family, and you have a modest home and a modest life. And
Fortunately, I think that's almost every town now. The last 20 years,
Yeah.
the homes have gotten bigger, unfortunately.
yeah, some people did understand that need for more apartments so that people can just have a place to live. But yeah, a lot of people miss that smaller one family kind of starter home that doesn't really exist at this point. And I found what was interesting in a lot of these surveys, people were concerned about the character of a town. So they don't want to put up these huge apartment buildings because it's not with the character. But then when we talk about what the character is of Plastow, like, what is it? I personally, I think it depends on where you go. So if we're looking at the village center, then there's some houses that are pretty close to the street and the sidewalk.
Right.
But a lot of people don't like that. But then that's what the character is. So I thought that was interesting. Some people understood that.
Is there part, where in the survey are you saying that people don't like the houses close to the sidewalk?
Mostly within the visual preference section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I pulled out one quote. It says, this was in regard to, I think the blue 2 family. Because we have enough of these types of older homes closer to the street in Plastow in the town zone of Main Street. No real yard, too close to the street. Looks nice and homey though, like a small town. I was like, do you like it or do you not like it? It's saying that it's too close, but it is homey. So I interpreted that as people will appreciate that homey and small town feel in the areas that it's already is
Where it
at,
exists
but they
already.
don't want it anywhere else.
Yeah.
With new development.
Right,
I can see that.
right.
Yeah. People appreciate setbacks. Definitely.
Yeah,
And I'm surprised that so many people were receptive of that.
Yeah. Sometimes you
Like,
never
oh,
know.
you know what that is? It's a setback. It's fun. I also made a section said what people had to say about housing. This is more so in general throughout all the questions and throughout everything. And I pulled out quotes of people that say no more housing, and then some housing and more housing is needed. So these are upsetting and also entertaining to go through. Under the no more housing section, terrible. Stop expanding a small town. Enough is enough. We are not Salem, New Hampshire. There were a bunch of people that are kind of torn on Tuscan Village. I had a couple people that say, like, we're not Salem, New Hampshire. We don't do Tuscan Village. Like, that's horrible. And
I
then
don't
a couple
think they have-
people were like,
we
oh,
don't
like,
have the land to do Tuscan
we could do
Village.
that. I know. Tuscan Village is huge.
Well, I mean, that was an old racetrack.
Yeah.
I mean, you figure that was a good sized racetrack there. That was,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
a mile around.
Oh, did
Then
you
had
hear about
stables and everything else.
Did you hear about the project at the Brook?
Yes.
Yeah, they were trying to put up a bunch of housing in the back of it.
I think I could vote it down.
They did. They're going to go to the housing board.
Yeah.
So, well, I'll be following that story closely.
Yeah.
I always just drive past it and I see that huge parking lot.
Where's this?
The Brook?
Where it
Seabrook?
used to be the
old
dog
Seabrook
track.
Dog track.
Oh,
Did you ever drive past it?
I don't think so.
It's huge.
Yeah, there's a
The
lot
front
of
is
land there.
paved and they don't use most of it. So there's grass growing through the cracks of the pavement. And
Well, when did they stop racing dogs there?
Many, many years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
A long time ago. You could be talking 20 years.
Yeah, but I mean, like the Rockingham racetrack there in Salemville, that was my whole life before.
Oh, it
they put
was. It
something
was. I
there.
mean, I spent a lot of time there with my grandfather and stuff. But if you go into the Brook now, what they did with, say, the clubhouse area and the whole inside, it's gaming.
The
slot-
simulcasting or something.
Yeah, the simulcast. There's slot machines in there. There's gambling tables.
yep, and they wanted to put a ton of housing in the back of it. The city doesn't want that. But I digress.
Yep.
Some people like Tuscan Village and some people absolutely hate it.
It's only a 20-minute
Is it
drive.
zoned for that? I mean,
Oh, Seabrook or here?
in Seabrook, yeah.
No, they had to get a variance. So it's technically an industrial area, I think it said. I don't know. I just read one news article on it.
We won't have to worry about that. We just don't have that much land.
Yes. No. It should be to maintain and what we have and help to improve what exists. Do not build. There should not be any more multifamily units. This will cause overcrowding. I feel Plasto is full. No need to squeeze more houses in. The current new builds in town have zero lawn space. Stop building. I want to know what they were talking about in that. People are here to stay, not going to lose their low interest rates. It is not the town's responsibility to provide more housing. We do not have the space and are not a city. No one wants to be on top of each other here, and taxes are high enough. And some of the quotes that to me represented some housing is okay. I thought this was very insightful. I wouldn't want to see segregated low income housing, the kind we used to call the projects. I believe housing should be integrated throughout the community, should take a variety of forms, and definitely include housing that is accessible to all types of renters or buyers. I'd like to see small units adding to existing properties like mine, as well as beautifully designed income-based developments that the renters or owners can be proud to live in. It can be done. Another one, short answer, curb stop building houses, especially single family ones. I'm concerned builders/landowners will continue to shoehorn more housing into previously undeveloped areas until there's very little forest, wetlands, green space left. Establish a cap of sorts based on what resources of the town can support. Not just land, but the water, aquifers, town services, schools, roads, etc. I am not like some folks who think that Plasto is or should get back to being a quaint country New England farm town. We are a suburb, and we're in a great place on the planet, so let's enjoy it without overcrowding it. Balancing needed housing growth for young home buyers with keeping the rural feel of the community. Overcrowding, we currently don't have a lot of land available in Plastow for building. Sidewalks are an issue, and for the future, I'd like to see assisted living for our seniors and would like a veterans home.
It seems like a theme that people think there's enough building being done for homes and things like that. That's what it seems like a lot of the comments that you're reading seem to go towards.
Yeah. I would like to see more
Right.
commercial areas be zoned for multiple rental properties for people that can't afford a home. There was also some mention of mixed use as well. There's a lot of concerns about overdevelopment of commercial space, but people were, I think, more receptive to having mixed use, to have those kind of courtier looking apartment buildings be in the area where there's a lot of commercial activity and there's public water.
We got most of the comments here we can read through, right?
Yeah. Wait, but I didn't get to the more housing is needed.
Go right ahead. Not stopping you.
Well, you have to take the good with the bad.
Yep,
The
absolutely.
need for more 55 plus communities. Plastow is an aging community and the seniors need more options. Smaller and more affordable housing is needed, like ranches, not large, expensive single family homes. A neighborhood of tiny houses should be considered. The world and the USA's population has more than doubled since I was born. Additionally, the size of individual households has decreased. For example, before an average household may have had 6 or more people, now it has fewer people in the household. This points to a need for more individual housing units. I don't foresee this trend changing in the next several decades. The question is, how smart are we going to be in developing plans to address growing housing needs while improving the quality of life for the needs of a growing population? I thought that was nice. I'm concerned there is no affordable housing anymore. I would hope to see apartment complexes so younger people or families of smaller means can also find themselves a place to call home. I know of several 20-plus-year-olds that are unable to find a place to live because the state or town decides against apartment complexes. It could be even a 2 or 4 duplex. I think that's bad. I think that's bad for our future generations of families and couples. So some people are aware. There are more people on this earth.
Yeah.
Can't argue that.
No, you can't. And the thing is, if someone builds a big house, that's what people want. A lot of
Yeah.
them when they buy now. You don't see those developments really going in like when I was a kid, capes and ranches and splits. You
I
don't
know,
see
when's
that.
the last time you saw a ranch?
I mean, you see a ranch.
Or maybe
that-
it's kind of like a modified ranch, the ones that.
Yeah, but it's like all those, that's the type of development I grew up in. That was the 60s. That's what went in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't see that happening a lot anymore, and they're not those tight-knit suburban communities that are surrounding schools anymore. They're the prefab homes or a manufactured home,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call them. Not quite a trailer. It's also not a,
Right.
so. Yeah, that was what I got. So the main things are concerns about affordability, natural resources. People are really worried about taxes. They're not feeling confident. Even if they do want to downsize, it's not worth it.
Yep.
So there's no point. You're not going to downsize so that some other family can go into your house. You need other benefits. And no one knows what Plastow's housing goals are. And they like single family homes.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess we'll read through that and then
I think it's a lot of what we kind of know. Don't
Yeah.
you, kind of?
I would
I don't
ag-
think it's anything we didn't really know.
No, I think it kind of confirms, it confirms to me what I kind of thought it was going to be,
Yeah,
which is good to have.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same
I
thing.
mean, a
here
lot
all
of
the
stuff's
time.
out of control, out of our control. I mean, if, you
Sure
know,
is.
the affordability of housing, you know,
That's all over.
yeah,
Yeah.
the interest rates out of our control, taxes. There's some element to that, but it's, you know, it's a sort of a finite
Yeah,
pie.
right.
Yeah, we could make our zoning as unrestrictive as possible while still considering lot minimum for infrastructure. But if no one wants to build anything, then there's nothing that we can do about it.
Right.
So
And I think we have a mix of zoning right now that allows for different types of housing. I don't think we're really restrictive. I don't see us being
no, compared to other communities,
like not in my backyard type building. Do you know? I don't see that here. I think there's a lot of different types of homes and houses, and we did have apartments, and then they turned them all into condos, a lot of them. I mean, so,
yeah.
And that happened everywhere. A lot of towns did
Yeah.
that.
yeah, so,
And personally, I don't think that there's anything wrong with condos. That gives other people an opportunity to own
Right.
something and have an
Right.
investment. Unlike renting, you just throw your money away.
yeah,
Right, it's actually better, right?
But
You have
you
a chance to
need-
grow your money.
Yeah. But if you need somewhere, you know, relatively cheap to live for a couple years while you're saving up for
Yeah.
a house or a condo, there's nothing that you can do.
Right.
You can live with your parents.
unfortunately. Well, then later in life, they come to live with you.
Yeah.
I've come to the conclusion, having kids, they're like boomerangs. You throw them out into the wild and they come back. Out they go, back they come.
And then sometimes you wind up with grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way my family works. We have a house in Salem. It's been passed down generation to generation, and there's always a space for anyone that needs it, but it's mostly for my old people. So my grandma, my grandpa, my uncle, my great uncle, my great grandfather was there, my great aunt
Yeah.
was there, and they, you get to die in the house.
Yeah, well, you think about it, if you went back to, I'd say, my parents' generation and before that, especially in the cities, everybody kind of lived in 2 and 3 family homes, and it was the whole family living in it.
Yeah,
You know, the grandparents
Yeah.
watched the kids, and that's the way it was back then.
Yeah, that's what
I
I'm
mean, you'd
looking
go
for
in one
now.
door out and just run right into the other house because it was all family.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for now. You guys keep your eyes open for me.
Yep, will do. All right, thanks. So next up, we have the zoning amendments we had on here. I don't know if we've had much of a chance to look through it. I know we're missing probably almost half the board, right?
yeah, I think we should continue that till the,
We could definitely continue it. Do you just want to take a look at what I provided and just take a quick look and see if there's anything else that you would like to see?
That's what you put for the new for 2023? We might look to want to add.
is it this one here?
I don't know where she tucked it. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, one for the discussion.
Yeah, so the 2023 zoning amendment discussion, I didn't add to this one at all. This was,
Well, that was some leftovers from last
Yeah,
year
that
that
was
we
leftover.
tabled, right?
so I don't know if anyone had an opportunity to think about what their priorities for discussion were.
I definitely know as we're getting closer to the end of the year, we gotta really start looking at it and knocking a few of these off as we go along.
Just a point is, Lori, do you know what was the amendment that dealt with the multi-residential.
That was number 14 from last year.
I think, I have concerns about that because we don't have a multi-family residential, whatever, district. And my understanding is that that particular warrant article, before it was voted in, went through, I believe Tim might have wrote something on it. It moved through the planning department, and then when it came back in its current form. Right, so it's my understanding that Tim's iteration of it actually is probably on point. So I would think that that particular warrant articles, as it is now, it should probably be either pulled out, just rescinded, and maybe replaced with what, Tim was writing up.
But we have to
And if
bring it-
we don't have that, then I think at minimum, we should probably consider just, retracting it.
Well, that would have to be the voters, right?
Yeah.
No, if you have a concern, then it should be brought up, right? We should take a look at it.
Right.
Yeah, because
But-
it refers to a multifamily residential district, which we don't even have one of those.
You
So,
So, I mean, like on its face, it's like, it's defective.
Right, so if there's a concern, then we should be bringing it up. Absolutely.
But I believe in the process of it being drafted, there might be, something that preceded that instead of talking about districts and things like that, it might have been, iterated various uses. So,
Yeah. Do we have much scheduled for our next meeting? Or would we be able to maybe say, okay, well, we should just about have everybody here, let's look at some of these amendments.
Yeah,
So we
for
get
sure.
through some of these in October.
What are you talking about?
actually, which one was it? Was it number 14 from last year?
Yeah, number 14 from last year.
Yeah, it was the warrant article number 14 that was voted in. But I think on its face is it's defective because we don't have a zoning district that it refers to.
Okay.
Right. So, but I think in the process of it being drafted, there's an iteration of the draft that's probably on point.
So, yeah, well, we can pull it up, take a look at it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And let's take a look at some of these. Probably, it'd be nice if we could just take a look at the ones that we didn't do from last year and figure that we want to go forward with them or not.
Well, the one on the last page here, that was Z23-10, that
Okay.
refers to campers and RVs.
Yes.
I don't think we should be bringing that up at all,
Okay.
because I think there's something going on in front of the ZBA right now. And I think we're going to open a can of worms if we go forward with that.
Yeah, I probably don't disagree with that. Yeah, so if there's one, I mean, we may not want to put any of them that we tabled from last year.
Yeah.
And we may,
Well, I don't even
get the
know.
discussion though.
Oh, yeah, and I don't even know if we really had a understanding of the short-term rental, and I remember we talked a lot about it, but I don't know if we ever really understood it, because there was so much, last year we had a lot going on,
Yeah.
so,
So
I don't
there
know.
must have been something that that came up.
well, I think it
issue
has
of
to do like
short-term
with
rental.
Airbnbs and,
Yeah, but is that an issue in Plastow?
I don't know if it is. I mean, I know there's one next door here, but other than that, I don't know of any more in town.
Yeah, we're not really a vacation destination.
No,
Yeah. Like I know in Conway it's a huge issue.
Oh, sure there is. I mean, you got,
But-
you got places you could swim, you got skiing,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what where Airbnbs are great, right? I mean, I've used them.
Yeah. Airbnb is hard because it's their property. It's if you own a piece of property, then you should essentially be able to do whatever you want if you're not hurting anyone.
Right.
But then if everyone does it,
Yeah,
it ruins it.
I don't think it's a problem in Plastow.
Yeah, I don't
do you?
think no.
No, I don't think there is.
Nothing came up on the census data that I found that showed any short-term
I
rentals.
don't think there is. It's something, you can look at, talk about, just in case it did become something, we'd have something on the books.
Yeah,
It'd be more or less if we did it, be to be proactive if something changed. But I agree. I just don't see a lot of people saying, I'm going to spend the Airbnb in Plastow. that's the place to be, because Kohl's has some great sales.
Well, I mean, was it you that said that in Atkinson, there was actual, where people were renting their houses and things like that, on like an Airbnb basis for a period of time. I mean, I don't
know about Atkinson.
I don't know where. I'm
So like
seemingly,
Hampton, Seabrook, Rye.
Which all makes
Yeah,
sense. You have the
down
beach.
by the beach.
beach.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have water in this town.
No, but and you can camp in Plastow. So why would you ever want to get an Airbnb when you can just pop a tent?
Yeah. But yeah, if we can put this, I guess, on the agenda,
Short
to go over this for the next meeting.
Okay, yeah.
Go back over the zoning amendment discussion.
And
We
then
should at least have a few more of us here, which
yeah,
I'd
definitely.
like to have a lot more here.
And then I had typed up some stuff for commercial districts and agritourism. Just wanted to know if you had the chance to look at it. We don't have to talk about it all the way, but if you're like, oh, I was hoping that you would expand more on it in this way.
I think we need to tighten up on retail because everything out on 125 now is considered like retail.
Yeah.
Whether it's an MRI, CT scan, that's retail, or whether it's a heavy equipment rental, that's also considered retail. I think we have a problem with what's retail.
Okay. Retail definition. Yeah.
So if you could help find something that for retail.
Okay. But I just put the kind of the goals and objectives of each district. And then I put some guiding questions. And I did a use table for all. So you can actually see what is allowed and in what district. I think that was
So on page 4 of our zoning ordinances, we have, it says business. And then under business, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things listed under business, but we don't really have retail.
okay.
Yeah, so that might help what we have right now.
well, just also in terms of like what retail is, I mean, is it providing a service or are you going in and purchasing something?
Yeah.
That type of distinction.
Yeah.
See if other towns maybe might have something.
Yeah, they definitely do. I think that we should also talk about the different types of motor things. Because when that one application, I forgot the address, came up, I'm not even supposed to talk about specific.
Yep.
Sorry.
No.
We should tweak the definitions a little bit to discuss, cars, automobiles, and then the power sport things, dirt bikes, motorcycles. Because within the current zoning ordinance, it doesn't, there's no real difference. Or there is a difference between a whole car dealership and then like a motorcycle repair shop where they are also selling motorcycles, but it's less intensive. I don't know.
And again, it's probably all retail, right? Everything's retail. Yeah.
I think that anyone has a fair chance to fight the definition and say that it's retail. Where if we ever wanted anything to hold up in court, then the retail definition needs to be strengthened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
On the agritourism,
Yep.
now, I mean, I see your presentation here, but what does that actually entail? Is that just us adopting, like in whole or mass, a particular RSA?
Yeah. So no one actually has an agro-tourism ordinance in their zoning.
Right.
They just define it
Okay.
or say where it's allowed. So I looked at Fremont and Northampton. Fremont uses the RSA definition. And then it's within their use table. And that's pretty much it. And then Northampton, they have definitions for agriculture. Only the full definition from RSA. And their agricultural ordinance is more of a full ordinance, and I think that's maybe what you were getting at. So certain things require conditional use permits, like animal husbandry. If you have over a certain number of animals, you have to do so like X, Y, and Z. And you have to go in front of the planning board. Where our zoning ordinance, it's just agriculture.
So that's, ours just says agriculture.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean?
But
Do we defer
yeah, so
then
it's,
to the
it's
state?
flaky. So if,
Right.
and I understand communities are having an issue, they want to protect themselves because you can have like a sunflower field and a barn, and then you can have weddings in the barn. And is that an accessory use to the agriculture? It's like, not really, but if it doesn't say anything in your zoning, then it's hard to enforce. So that's where the agritourism definition does come in handy, but it is an RSA. So it's legally binding anyway, even if it's not in.
So you could,
Ordinance.
if you, let's say, had a sunflower farm and a barn and you wanted to then use your site as, sort of a rustic place to have a wedding or something like that. I mean, would that fall under the purview of like agritourism?
Yeah, it is considered some sort of agritourism, but agritourism, it's just so broad and that's such a gray area. And then sometimes it's argued, only half of acres used for parking and for entertainment, where there's 10 acres used for growing vegetables. It's like,
Well,
yes,
like-
but
like-
you're still
like
having hundreds of people.
Like an example, I'm just trying to think of the name of, like there's an orchard that's close by, I think, heading off towards Portsmouth, let's say. That you go there and it's, you park, you have a farm stand, you might have hay rides, go pick apples, then you get, you can go in and there might be a corn maze or something like that. I mean, that falls under the,
Yeah, that's agritourism.
yeah, and maybe there's some sort of like food or whatever that's sold there and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, would something like that, that's considered agritourism, but
Yes.
so if an eye towards like fostering that type of activity and not being an impediment to it, how would we go about being encouraging of that sort of thing?
I mean, I don't think that we are holding people back from doing that right now. The actual definition of agritourism is attracting visitors to a farm to attend events or activities that are accessory uses to the primary farm operation, including but not limited to being provided a meal, making overnight stays, enjoyment of farm environment, education which shall be instruction or learning about the farm's operations, or active involvement in the activities of the farm. But then sometimes you have apple orchards and they have face painting for kids. That has nothing to do with this farm. So a zoning officer could go up to them and say, that's not agritourism. This has nothing to do with farming, but no one cares. So you know what I mean? Like it's also gray. But by having the definition of agriculture and agritourism, it's kind of like a good faith.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because it's legally binding regardless of whether we put it in our zoning ordinance, because it's an RSA. Yeah. But I know, yeah. know what you mean.
So what would be the upside to be putting it in? Like, I mean, you gave an example of, let's say, a couple communities here that that do it right.
Yeah. I talked to Jen Rowden about it too, and she said only like several of the RPC communities even talk about agriculture within the zoning ordinance. Everyone just follows the New Hampshire RSA.
Yeah, 'cause it's already there.
Agriculture.
I get it.
But what would be the upside for it? So, like I said, you know, what is Northampton trying to do, and what is Fremont trying to do that is already contemplated in the RSA? Like, I mean, apart from like just affirmatively saying that we're for agritourism, just in case you didn't know that.
Essentially. So within the RSA, it is very obvious that we can't purposely inhibit agricultural uses by making all of these crazy restrictions. But you are allowed to require a conditional use permit under certain cases. No municipality shall adopt an ordinance, bylaw, definition, or policy regarding agritourism activities that conflicts with the definition of agritourism. And then I read you the definition, which is super vague. Enjoyment of farm environment. You can enjoy environments in many ways. Yeah, so I understand your question. I don't know. I don't think that there's an answer. If Plasto wanted to be more strict and do more due diligence in application review for agricultural,
I would say no. I'd
but
say,
if we're trying to do the opposite,
yeah, I want to do the opposite.
Yeah,
So
then-
hypothetically, you want to be in the same way that you would want to be encouraging to other businesses and attract them, you know,
yeah,
by adjusting your zoning and things like that. All right. I mean, I don't think we'd want to say that we want to be hostile to business. I think that'd be contrary to
yeah,
our economic development plan.
yes.
But you know, how would we be less restrictive and more accommodating for agricultural type use?
I don't think that there is a way to be. Everything is in line with the RSA if it's not mentioned in our zoning ordinance. So we're not any more restrictive than the state. And the state is only restrictive mostly for health and hazard reasons.
Right.
If you want 300 cows on an acre of property, then that is not allowed.
Right.
A lot of cows.
Exactly. It's too many cows.
All right.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. I guess the only way to be more welcoming is to waive fees. The town has the ability to waive fees for certain uses. But that's it. Yeah. The site plan regulations are still the site plan regulations. So they have to do a certain amount of work in order to either start a business or significantly alter.
So put some of those back on the agenda for the next time. All right, do we have any old business? New business? Everybody, I'm sure, has had a chance to look at the letter that we got in from
Yeah.
the RPC.
How come it went up to $1.03? It used to be $1 per capita.
I don't actually know what you're talking about.
Oh, okay.
It's,
The per
I haven't
capita.
seen this.
Oh, the per capita for RPC, for us to be a member.
Population increase?
it's the dues, right?
The
It's
dues.
calculated based on the population estimate, 7,888, right? So the dues rate is $1.03.
It used
Per
to be
capita.
$1.
I'm not sure. That was probably a commission
Yeah.
vote recently. I would be happy to find out for you, though.
But what we have here, if we want to move to recommend for the budget, that we put that dollar amount in there.
Well, I could do it. I move to recommend to the Board of Selectmen that we renew the Town of Plastow's membership in the Rockingham Planning Commission and pay the requested dues in the amount of $8,125.
I'll second it.
Second by Laura. Any discussion? All right, call for all those in favor?
Aye.
400. And you have one legal notice for public hearing on Wednesday, October 18th, 2023 at 6:30. The location's 145 Main Street, second floor, Plastown, New Hampshire. Consider the following. It'll be PB 23-11. A conceptual discussion with Sweet Hill Farm LLC regarding a potential two-lot subdivision and development for housing of the property located 82 Newton Road, tax map 68, lot 8, in both the LDR and ICR zoning districts. The applicant is the property owner of record. This is a conceptual discussion only, so that'll be at our next meeting. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to bring up? All right, looks like we'll be closing the meeting at 8:04. Have a good night, everyone.
Right.